I'm KT McFarland. This is DEFCON 3, and we've got Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon on the phone now. Now, Jennifer, I don't know if you had a chance to listen to my conversation with the Chinese foreign minister, but he was very upbeat about U.S.-Chinese relations going forward. We have another thing occurring right now, which is Secretary of Defense Gates is in China, meeting with the Chinese military, and he may hear a very different story. What is your sense of what's happened so far and is going to happen?
Well, here's what's interesting about his trip over there. This is the first time in about a year since the Chinese cut off military relations with the U.S. over its sales of about $6.4 billion of arms to Taiwan. The reason Secretary Gates is there, and it is significant that he's there because it had been very chilly between the two militaries for the past year. He's there to break the ice before he was invited because President Hu Jintao is coming to Washington for the summit on January 19th. Of course, the foreign ministry wants to put forward its best foot, saying that things are warmer than they possibly are. What we saw this morning in Beijing was a somewhat chilly press conference where, yes, both sides are saying they're making progress and they've opened the door again to relations. But when the Chinese defense minister essentially lectured Gates in front of the press about selling in the future arms to Taiwan, Gates stood there very stoically, stone-faced, and did not agree to that. So, again, as soon as, and this is an annual event usually when the U.S. sells weapons to Taiwan, it'll be interesting to see whether the Chinese cut off relations again. It's a bit of a kabuki dance that we know the outcome each time. The Chinese have been protesting this for some time.
Yeah. Well, I talked to some people from the Pentagon 2 or 3 weeks ago about the lead up to this Defense Department military-to-military relationship and the visit, and they were saying that the Chinese had sent military leaders to the Pentagon, say, a month ago, and that the Chinese leaders were very, very, clear that they were not going to be beholden to America for anything and that they should not be lectured to by any Americans. And the official I talked to said that this is in great contrast to previous visits that the Chinese have had to the United States to China, where the Chinese military has always been very eager to, can we do things together? What are you guys up to? Let's share secrets. But it was a much more aggressive, standoffish tone to the meetings. And that certainly would bear out what you've just said about the Chinese defense minister lecturing the Secretary of Defense.
I mean, for him to lecture Secretary Gates in public, it's one thing behind closed doors, but you know what that means in Chinese culture. And for Gates to stand there stone-faced, it does suggest an underlying tension that has not been thawed as a result of this visit. I also think you have to look at Chinese expenditure on its military. I mean, it is spending like a drunken sailor at this point in time. Officially, and there's always a gap, as you know, KT, between officially what China spends on its military and what it's really doing behind the scenes and what analysts think is really happening. But officially, they're saying that their expenditure went up by 7.5% in 2010. That is a big step forward for China. They are buying stealth bombers. They are making progress on an aircraft carrier, missile systems. They are moving forward as we are contracting, and the Defense Department announcing budget cuts, and of course last year it raised a lot of eyebrows when Secretary Gates capped the number of F-22 stealth fighters at 187. That raised a lot of eyebrows in the Air Force because those fighters, while they may not be that useful in Afghanistan and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, they are designed for future conflict with large powers such as China. So and they also are a great deterrent. So I wouldn't necessarily say that this is a big thawing. When I traveled with Secretary Gates back in 2007, there was a lot was made about a new hotline that was going to be established between the two militaries. There's no evidence that hotline has ever really been used, and the Chinese leaders, whenever there's a crisis with North Korea, they're very slow to return phone calls from the Pentagon and the White House.
I was in Taiwan about a year ago, and it was one of the things that I found striking, because I'd gone to graduate school in Taiwan, was the difference. The Chinese leadership today in Taiwan, the Taiwan leadership, has started a number of initiatives to have cultural exchanges, economic relations with mainland China, with the People's Republic of China. So to a certain extent, it sounded like they were solving their own problem. And yet why the Chinese are using Taiwan, and as you say, an annual arms sale to Taiwan, nothing special about this over previous years, why they're focusing on that as some major point of contention between the United States and China, I think is a significant point, and particularly, like you said, in the Asian culture, for a Chinese leader to lecture an American, and it's not the first time we've seen it. We've seen the Chinese leaders lecture President Obama. We've seen now the Chinese defense leader lecturing the American defense leader. So I think that, what are you hearing at the Pentagon about sort of an increasingly aggressive stand by the Chinese military?
Well, I think, look at what was leaked out just in recent days. It was there were those pictures and the video of the J-20 stealth fighter jet. That was a sort of in-your-face sanctioned leak of a test flight by this J-20 stealth fighter that the Chinese have been working on. When I showed the pictures of that plane to a very senior member of the Air Force here in the Pentagon, he said, look, they're making very, very serious progress, and he could tell by the seams on that plane that the stealth technology was much better than even perhaps what the intelligence agencies had thought that it was. He said they still have a little ways to go. It's not an elegant plane, but it's clearly a copy of an American F-22. So what the Chinese are doing is they're reverse engineering our aircraft at a very, very quick and not so stealthy anymore speed.